we present a short story called Abtomat, written by Andrew Dresner, all rights reserved. Narrated by using the voice Zephyr in Google Gemini 2.5 Pro Preview TTS. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, business, events, and incidents are the products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. David Clark put in time off for holiday and didn't tell his boss or coworkers about his plans, afraid some would poke fun and others would try to talk him out of it. He didn't know how a video game could have had such a profound effect. He began playing over a year ago. The virtual landscapes intriguing. While at work, he'd think of nothing but the game. Finding it hard to concentrate, he needed to figure out a way to get past it. After deleting it, he tried to forget. And just a few days later, he reinstalled it and spent a marathon to regain his prior progress. In the months that followed, his obsession continued to grow. David began to gain weight as his habits grew poor. He'd pick food up on the way home and switch on the computer, then spend the whole night playing, only managing a few hours of sleep. He worked as a programmer for a company that provided cloud storage. The days would drag as he sifted through countless lines of code while drinking liters of tea. The game was set in Chernobyl. The players would defend themselves against genetically modified creatures. One Saturday, he caught sight of a comment on a message board. It was from a woman who called herself a stalker. She'd visit places that were either off limits or difficult to get to. David contacted her and they began chatting. Her name was Danica, and she'd take small groups into the exclusion zone around Chernobyl. David sent a text to Danica. "Why wouldn't I sign up with one of the guided tours instead?" She responded, "That's fine if you want to hang with the noobs with cameras." "Is it safe to go in with you?" "Absolutely. From the countless groups I've brought, never had any major problems." "When can we go?" David asked. "I've got someone else who also wants to go into the zone. How about the end of next month?" Danica asked. "Excellent. I'm in," David said. "Great. We'll have a lot of ground to cover. I'll confirm payment, dates, and where to meet." She sent an address of a bicycle shop in Kiev. David printed a map of the exclusion zone, which encompasses 30 kilometers and borders the Pripyat River. The plan was to get close to the edge of the zone and bike into it. He went online to look at dosimeters and asked Danica which one he should get. She told him that she'll provide one for the trip, along with the solar charger for their phones. He was still tempted to buy his own, but ultimately didn't. David was staring out the window as the plane touched down. He grabbed his bag from overhead and waited for the others to move towards the door. He passed through the gate into a customs checkpoint. He saw someone else from the same plane at the counter next to him. The young man was being questioned why he brought a dosimeter and a road sack. After pulling apart all his things, they found a map of the exclusion zone. He was escorted to a room off to the side. "What is purpose of visit?" the agent asked. "I'm visiting a friend at the university for a few days," the guard said. "Por any malchik?" to another guard. He then nodded, stamped his passport, and waved him through. David moves past the counter and waved at the old woman next to him. "Do you know what he said?" She frowned and said, "Plump boy," then patted him on the back. After a quick ride in a taxi, David was in Kiev. The address written on the slip of paper 6 weeks ago when the trip didn't seem so real. He sat on a bench outside the bike shop. Danica was to show up within the hour. The day was warm, so he took off his jumper and stuffed it into his bag. He pulled out a water bottle and took a few sips. The food he'd eaten before takeoff was now sitting in his stomach like a lead ball. David crossed his legs and his foot was shaking erratically. He grabbed his phone when a message came in. It was from Danica. She said they'd be there in 5 minutes. Not long after, a minivan pulled up. A man and woman got out. Both looked to be in their 20s. The woman, petite, her short blonde hair wrapped around her face. The man was tall and muscular, his dark hair neatly combed and parted to one side. They looked as if they belonged on the cover of a survival magazine. David grabbed his bag and got up to join them. Sorry we're late. This one's flight was delayed and had to pick him up, the woman said. David nodded and knew from her picture the woman was Danica. Good to meet you, Danica said, shaking David's hand with a firm grip. I'm Errol Kaiser, the man said with an outstretched hand. David took it and they shook as Danica spoke with the driver. He'll be back in an hour to take us to the border, Danica said. They entered the bike shop and within a half hour each had a bike, road sack, and sleeping bag. Danica guided them around to the back of the building. They began repacking everything into the road sacks. David stripped down to his skivvies and pulled on a yellow running suit. Danica stood looking at him with her hands on her hips and then walked off. Where'd she go? Errol asked while checking his bike. David shook his head. So what do you do back home? He asked. I'm about to attend university, going to study. Errol trailed off as Danica returned. Put these on, she said, tossing David a pile of clothes. Once done, he was wearing a black short-sleeved shirt, trousers, and a vest. They put on their road sacks and walked their bikes to the front of the building. They headed to a shop a few blocks away, and Danica told them to wait outside with the gear. A few minutes later, Danica emerged carrying 3 shopping bags. They hung them from the handlebars as they pushed their bikes away from the entrance. Each of us will carry some, she said. David pulled open his road sack and began shifting things around in an attempt at fitting the food rations. His water bottles were posing a challenge. Danica grabbed his yellow running suit away from him and tossed it into a trash bin near the curb. She shook her head as he nodded. 20 minutes later, they were done and headed back to the bike shop. Once they stopped, David began to rub his eyes. Where would they stay for the night? Would they be traveling in the dark? He was about to ask these questions as the van pulled up. They loaded their packs and climbed in as the driver finished lashing their bikes to a rack. The driver and Danica began speaking in a language David couldn't understand. This is my cousin Reuben. He lives on the other side of town, Danica said. The landscape transformed from city to country. They could see farms on one side and a tall forest on the other. They stopped at a dirt road as the sun moved just below a line of trees. They unloaded as Reuben gave Danica a hug. She waved to him as he pulled away. We'll take this road a few kilometers and then enter the zone, Danica said as she hung her dosimeter on a loop from her pack. The road sack was heavy, and David found it challenging as the terrain became rocky. He turned to Errol but said nothing as he began to falter. He was then able to right himself, but almost crashed into Danica. She had stopped ahead at an opening in a rusted wire fence. Careful of the barbs, Danica said as they lifted the bikes through. We have to move quick. 2 troubles, radiation and a security patrol. Keep up and we'll be okay. Once through, they came upon a hill which led down into a forest. They got on their bikes and a few minutes later heard the dosimeter. It was alerting them of a high concentration of radiation. This went on for a long time where the alarm would periodically break the silence. They came across a clearing and then to another road. David could see what looked like a cemetery off to one side. The sun was now behind the trees, and in a short time it'd be dark. Not long now. We'll camp in one of the abandoned houses up the road, Danica said as she stopped off to the side near a cemetery. David was shaking as he struggled to maintain balance. He rolled past the cemetery, picked up speed, and kept going. They could barely see him as they took off after him and struggled to keep up. This isn't good, Danica said as she raced ahead. David was now rolling along by himself. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he pulled a hand off the handlebars to wipe it away. His front tire caught a rock and he toppled over. Errol almost ran over him as he skidded to a stop. David's bike was laying next to him as Danica jumped off hers and ran over. I got creeped out, David said. Your stupidity can cost us our lives, Danica said. Huh? David asked as Danica pointed to his pack and bike. A puddle was forming next to his pack and his front wheel flat. Errol picked up the pack as Danica helped David. They slowly made their way along the road and found an unoccupied house a few meters away. Some furnishings were strewn about on the dusty floor. "We're staying here?" David asked as he stood in the doorway. "Unless you want to camp outside," Danica said as David frowned. They brought everything in and closed the door. Danica fired up a lamp she pulled from her pack, and their faces were partially lit. Dust hung in the air, causing a perpetual haze. Dinner consisted of a meal pack for each of them. Danica pulled out a plastic bag and collected the trash. David unpacked his belongings and began waving them around. "How about we light the oven?" he asked. "Not a good idea. Anyone passing by could see smoke from the chimney," Danica said. "So what do I do with my wet clothes?" David asked. "You'll have to wear them to dry them out," Danica said. As David frowned, she reached into her pack and threw Errol a zippered pouch. He opened it and saw it was a toolkit along with some tire patches. "Can you fix it?" Errol nodded as he knelt down next to David's bike and began pulling the tire away from the rim. He was able to pull the tube out from the rim and found the rupture. Thankfully, it was no bigger than one of the patches. The smell from the glue filled the air. He put the tube back into the tire and pushed the bead into the rim. "How do you know how to do that?" David asked. "I do quite a bit of cycling," Errol said as he grabbed the pump from Danica and began inflating the tire. Danica handed out wet napkins and began wiping her hands and face. "This is how you wash in the zone," she said. They pulled out their sleeping bags and laid them out. Danica had hers against the door. "This is our security system. We've got to watch out for bandits," Danica said. "For what?" David asked. "Stalkers who sneak in and steal," Danica said. David had his back against the wall facing the door, face pale. Errol got into his sleeping bag and had his hands behind his head. An ominous cry echoed through the still air, which made David jump. "Coyotes a few kilometers away. They typically keep to themselves," Danica said as she turned off the lamp. David could hear her shuffle across the floor. "Listen, we've got a lot of ground to cover tomorrow. You'd better get some sleep," Danica said. David walked over to his sleeping bag and climbed in. The floor was hard and the dust made him cough. The cries seemed to be getting closer, and David found it hard to sleep. They woke up as light began to fill the house. David changed into some of his damp clothes. Danica handed out power bars as they packed up. They ate them as they handed out. The morning air cooled as they moved out of the village and into some thick trees. The dosimeter's alarm occasionally sounded, reminding them of the invisible danger around them. Several kilometers later, they came upon a clearing which bisected their narrow path. Tall metal towers reached into the sky. High-tension power lines stretched between them as they ran into the distance. "If we follow the line, we can reach the power plant directly," Danica said. David's head hurt and felt nauseous. He stopped, ran into the brush, and began to retch. "Hey, you okay?" Danica called from the road. "Yeah, I'll be a minute," David called back. He emerged from the road, beads of sweat on his forehead, face pale. The dosimeter's alarm broke in. Danica pointed ahead and David nodded as Errol frowned and then handed him a bottle of water. "Thanks, mate," David said as he sipped. They started up again. Their pace was slow. Danica hung back behind David as Errol took the lead. A few hours later, they crossed a road and had to duck behind a thick clump of trees. Moments later, a tour van passed. Danica nodded and they pulled their bikes back onto the road. They stopped at a clearing and Danica laid her bike down and took off her pack. She pulled the meter from her pack and walked the perimeter. "This should be okay for a short time. You can relieve yourselves beyond that clump of thick trees," Danica said. David went first and almost tripped as he ducked behind the trees. They waited for him to return, and then the others took turns. Errol watched Danica as she headed away from them. "You don't look good," Errol said. "I'm all right." "Being out here is not for everyone," Errol said, as he lifted his bike over his head. "You okay?" Danica asked as she returned. "Yeah, I'm all right," David said, voice trailing. "We'll be in Pripyat before dusk, find a flat, and make camp." Danica and Errol ate, packed up, and they rolled in single file for the next few kilometers. The brush was taken over the road and the concrete crumbling below them. They stopped for a break before moving on. Their progress became slower as the sun headed into the horizon. Listen, we'd better hurry up if we're to make it before dark, Errol said, glaring at David. David hit the brakes and Errol almost collided with him. What's that supposed to mean? Like I said before, you aren't prepared for this. Listen, I don't need any shite from you. You don't know me, David said. You're a gamer wannabe stalker who should have known better to be out in the zone, Errol said. Danica pulled up between them. We have no time for a pissing contest with the two of you. Freeze whatever's going on. We need to get out of here before the tour buses make their way out for the day. They both nodded as they got back on their bikes. They entered the city as dusk descended upon them. Trees and low-lying brush had taken over. They could see a few crumbling buildings poking through. They headed toward a group of apartment buildings. Danica and Errol entered one of them and ascended to an unoccupied flat on the 4th floor. What's with you? Why are you starting with him? Danica asked. I don't understand why you agreed to bring him in, Errol said. Lay off him. He's my responsibility, Danica said. Where'd he go now? To vomit again? You know the zone isn't for everyone, Errol said. What makes you an expert? Danica asked. I did my homework and trained, Errol said as he grabbed her arms. Like I said, he's my responsibility, Danica said as she pulled away. Now I see what's going on. Sorry to be such a burden. So what do I do now? Turn around and head back out? David asked as he entered the flat. You couldn't make it back alone if you tried, Errol said. David combed his hand through his hair and leaned against the door jamb. Danica pulled the meal packs out and lit the lamp. She waved to David, but he moved past them and sat down on the floor at the far end of the room. They could hear voices coming from the courtyard below. Errol ate and had his back toward David. Danica pulled out a small stove and boiled water for tea. Once done, handed some to David. Thanks, David said as he took a sip. We're not alone. Many come out at night to explore, Danica said. We'll get some sleep and have a full day to explore tomorrow. They laid out their sleeping bags and each took a trip outside to relieve themselves. One would keep watch as the others took turns. David was the last and was thankful his stomach had calmed. They entered the building and heard a crash from outside. Errol rushed out and called to them. Danica's bike had been tossed out the window and was laying on the ground. She ran into the building and up the stairs. Errol followed. She came upon the 4th floor landing and could see 2 people dressed in black running up the stairs. She followed and came upon the roof hatch, which they slammed down on her. Danica was able to push up on it and get onto the roof. She could hear Errol calling from below. 2 young men ran across the roof and jumped over to the other building. She followed and one of them tripped her and she tumbled into a retaining wall. Errol watched as she hit into it. He turned and ran back down past David, who had just made it to the hatch. She's on the roof of the other building, Errol said as he disappeared down the stairs. David headed back to the flat, grabbed Danica's pack, and ran after Errol. He got to the entrance to the other building and began to climb the stairs. Sweat poured off of him as he made his way up. He almost tripped on Errol, who was laying face down. Hey man, you okay? David said as he helped him up. Those scumbags got past me. Where the hell were you? Errol asked. David put on the road sack and helped Errol. They reached the roof hatch and David had trouble getting through it but managed. He then pulled Errol up and they ran over to Danica. She was laying on the roof face down, not moving. Errol knelt next to her and checked her pulse. They carefully flipped her over and Errol brushed her hair out of her face and moved his hand down her cheek. He grabbed the torch from David and pulled each eye open and shined the light into them. I hope she doesn't have a concussion, Errol said. And what about you? David asked. I'm all left up, man. How do you know how to do all this stuff? David asked. I'm heading to medical school next month, Errol said, and David got up and ran to the hatch. Hey, where are you going? Errol looked up at the sky and back to Danica. He was shaking his head. 15 minutes later, David emerged from the hatch. Holy shit, brother, I thought you left us, Errol said. I realized our stuff was still in the flat and didn't want a chance having it get pinched, David said while handing Errol a bottle of water. Good thinking. Couldn't make it out of the zone by myself anyway, David said as he winked. Errol let out a chuckle and stopped as his face contorted into a grimace. David unpacked the road sacks and what he was able to recover. They had a few bottles of water and the food packs. I got the stove, but they took the dosimeter and lamp. Our bikes are in a pile in front of the other building. Looks like they came back and made sure we couldn't use them again. David said, They're hateful, Danica moaned. Ah, glad you're awake. I've been missing your company,
Errol said as David nodded. They filled her in and provided an inventory. David got up and stretched. The air cool and they could occasionally see the moon as clouds moved past. Can you both walk? David asked. Danica shook her head. No, my left ankle is killing me. How about you? Yeah, but I might have a few bruised ribs. No way I can carry you, Errol said. How about if we both? David asked. No way, Errol said. I'll see if I can reach Reuben, Danica said, but then realized the screen on her phone was shattered. I have mine, but the battery is low. Been meaning to have it changed, Errol said. How about you? Danica asked, looking at David. Mine's at 25%, he said. Since they took the solar charger, you'll have to head over to the power plant. Call Reuben, he might be able to help, Danica said. How about I ask a tour group or someone at the visitor station? David asked. No, they'll throw both of you out of the country and jail me. Hey, unlock this for me, Danica said and grabbed David's phone. Isn't that better than starving to death up here? Errol said as Danica shook her head. I've added Reuben's number. Take the torch, a bottle of water, and head south. You'll come to a road where you'll see streetlights. In the base, you'll find an outlet. See if you can find one that allows you to be out of sight, Danica said as she struggled to sit up. Hold on, take my battery pack. See if you can charge it, Errol said, handing it to David. David picked up his road sack, loaded it, and passed them the sleeping bags. He nodded as he took his phone back and descended through the roof hatch. Do you think he'll make it? Errol asked. He'd better, Danica said. David took a chance by using the GPS from his phone. He figured it'd be better to be heading in the right direction than conserve it and end up lost. It worked out and the GPS showed he'd be at the power plant in an hour. He'd already been walking for 30 minutes. The moon was behind thick clouds. He could barely make out a road beyond the trees in the distance. The streetlights dotted the landscape as he emerged onto the road. David could see the dome that covered Reactor 4. The bases which held the streetlights contained a door with some sort of lock. It required a special tool to open. David tried with his fingers, but it wouldn't budge. He looked within his road sack, but it contained nothing that helped. He forgot the toolkit, which was still in Danica's pack. The thought of going back crossed his mind. The time it'd take to make a round trip was out of the question. He began to feel queasy as he moved off the road into a group of buildings. David pulled out the water bottle, took a sip, and stopped once he'd seen how much was left. It had to last until he made it back to the others. It was probably not the best idea to get so close to the power plant. Most of the buildings were abandoned in various states of collapse. He followed some signs and was able to avoid anything that showed high radiation warnings. A modern-looking building stood to the south, and he got to the front and peered in. It looked like a restaurant, tables and chairs just inside. The counter beyond looked like the cafeteria he'd frequent back home. An even glow came from a series of display cases off to the side. He pulled on the door and found it locked. David went around back and tried another. It was locked, along with all the others. Going to the power plant was out of the question. Guards were stationed all hours and they must have cameras around. His phone was alerting that it required power and would shut off very soon. He found Reuben's number, tapped on it, and waited. It rang, but no answer. A message came on, but he didn't get a chance to leave one. His phone then powered off. Another wave of nausea came on with an intensity that almost made him retch. David took a deep breath and continued on. Behind him was a shed, and when he tried the door, it thankfully opened. A variety of power tools sat on shelves off to the side. He pulled one off and took its battery out. If he stripped his charge cable and attached the leads to the battery, it could destroy his phone. He walked to the back of the shed and found a small workbench and stool. He took a seat and by instinct almost turned on a radio that was sitting next to him. It was one of those units that also served as a charger for the tools. On the front, below the volume knob, were 2 USB ports. He jammed his charge cable into one of them, the other end into his phone, and waited. The tone from it made him jump, indicating it was charging. He breathed out deeply and wiped away sweat from his brow. He then attached Arrow's battery pack and it also began to charge. David picked his head up and for a moment didn't know where he was, still sitting in the shed and his phone registering fully charged. He tried Ruben and got no answer. After sending a text message, a response came through. "How bad is Danica? She okay?" Ruben wrote. "Yeah, but she could have a broken ankle," David responded. David's phone rang and he told Ruben what happened. "I can't come into the zone and you can't alert security. That would end things for us and our livelihood depends on running the tours. Not to mention, we'll both end up in jail. You gotta get out of the zone and to the rendezvous any way you can, especially without detection. Good luck and be safe." Ruben sighed as the call ended. The prospect of returning without a plan was incomprehensible. It was almost 5 a.m. When he attempted to stand, he almost fell to the floor. His legs tingled as he tried to regain his footing. David then stowed the battery pack, grabbed his phone, and made his way out of the shed to the main road. The air was cool as he headed into the brush, which led to some dense trees. David heard a snap, which sounded like a branch cracking. He quickened his pace and distinctly heard someone from behind, feet stomping onto the ground with significant force. David put his phone into a pouch and zipped it up. He picked up his pace as the footfalls got louder. He entered a run and realized it may have been a mistake putting his phone away, not knowing if he was going in the right direction. A security guard in pursuit? Wouldn't they be shouting? He thought as his heart began to pound. The moon was now visible, which allowed for a better view of the landscape. He turned briefly and saw someone closing fast. David's left foot caught a root, which caused him to tumble forward. He was then laying on the ground face up. To him, it sounded as if a siren had gone off. It was deafening. Then, realizing that it was he who was making the sound, reminiscent of a scream preceding a nightmare. It was a bipedal figure approaching. Details were hard to make out. It could have been his mind playing tricks. To him, it looked like one of the characters from the game, an undead being affected by radiation, now preying on the living. This one was going to kill him. His thoughts were of Danica and Arrow as everything went black. David felt something being pushed into his mouth and began to choke as he struggled to pull away. The grip on him was nothing like he'd ever felt. He opened his eyes and gasped. There was a man holding him with one arm and the other held the water bottle. The man looked like one of the mannequins he'd seen at the Air and Space Museum back home. Hair sculpted into the head, painted yellow with light brown highlights. The man let go and moved back. He was wearing a brown camouflage jumpsuit and a vest similar to Errol's. A high tone followed by a low one came from the man as he sat down. He crossed his legs and rested his arms on his thighs. The sun was peeking through the trees and the ground felt damp as David sat up. Could he be wearing some kind of mask? He asked himself as he stared. The eyes were also painted on, and the mouth, thin lips forever pressed together. The nose protruded but had no nostrils. On the left side of the vest was a name embroidered into it. Abtomat? David pulled out his phone and typed it in. The connection was weak, but he was able to get a translation. The words that showed up were automatic, machine, and the last entry was robot. "Are you a robot?" David asked. Abtomat sat motionless, no pumps or servos making any noise, and no response. How do I communicate with this thing? David thought, as he picked up his phone and typed something into a translator and played it. It was the same question, but translated into Russian. The figure nodded, which proceeded with the same set of tones as before. It was a robot, David was certain, but what was it doing here? Was it going to bring him back to the security station near the visitor center? Turn him in, and what would happen to the others? Could he make a run for it? Would the robot pursue again? David thought as he got up, stretched, and opened the GPS on his phone. He needed to head in the opposite direction. He then turned and began walking. The robot didn't move. Go home,
David said, and then used the translator again, but it did nothing. I have to go here. He positioned his phone with the map facing the robot. It got up and they walked for a few kilometers, and the robot changed direction. It brought them to a path that cut through a thick group of trees. David could see Pripyat ahead in the distance. They arrived in the middle of the city and had to avoid a tour bus as it made its way past. David flagged a building and his phone provided a detailed route. They walked past the pile of bikes laying at the entrance. They entered the building and slowly climbed the stairs. David reached the hatch, pushed through, and his heart sank. They weren't there. He jumped onto the roof, ran around, and found them. We had to hide from an air patrol early this morning. How'd you make out? Danica asked. David filled them in as to what Reuben said and about Abtomat. What are you talking about? Errol asked. David turned and didn't see Abtomat below. He returned, sat down, and exhaled. I know we shouldn't have sent him. What the hell do we do now? We're going to run out of water and food. No way to make it out of the zone. We're screwed. My God, what have you done to us? Errol hissed. Hold on, Danica said. Maybe we can get to the visitor center and hitch a ride with one of the tours going out, Errol said. Even if we pay them, no way to get through the checkpoints without papers, Danica said. Great, then we starve to death here, Errol said. David sat with his head in his hands and was shaking. Errol got up and began to pace while clutching his chest. Danica tried to stand but fell down with a dull thud. The sun had reached its highest point. A few clouds passed by, and they could hear someone climbing up onto the roof. It was Abtomat, and it was carrying a thin plastic bag filled with bottles of water. Errol turned, fell down, and scooted backward away from the robot. It stopped, and then two tones emanated from it. Holy shit, you were telling the truth, Errol whispered. Danica grabbed David's phone and sent a text to Reuben asking for him to come in and get them. He still refused. The sun was now sitting high above them with an occasional cloud moving past it. Way too convenient having that thing show up. Must be a security drone or something, Errol said. Wouldn't it have dragged me back to the checkpoint near the visitor center? David asked. He pulled out his phone and began waving it around. The signal was barely enough when he reached the far end. He opened a search engine on his phone and typed in Abtomat. He found a website, downloaded it, and put the phone into airplane mode to conserve battery. Can you please read this? David asked, handing his phone back to Danica. Abtomat was made 7 years ago by a company called Kritiskaya, based in Moscow. It was built specifically to decommission the electrical grid around the exclusion zone, since people have been pulling it apart to sell as scrap. They were attempting to build a fleet of robots, but only managed one. A doctor, Evgeny Petya, was in charge of the project. A fire destroyed the factory a few years ago, and Dr. Petya died in it. The cause was never known. I guess the robot has been in the zone all this time, Danica said. Can you carry her? David asked. Abtomat stood motionless. Danica said something in Russian. Abtomat knelt down, scooped up Danica, and brought her to the hatch. David and Errol packed up and followed them. They found Danica and Abtomat inside one of the flats 2 levels below. It contained a mattress, a small table, and a few chairs. Abtomat placed Danica onto the mattress. Errol pulled out the meal packs as David lit the stove. Danica said something to Abtomat. The robot picked her up and left. They returned a short time later, and they ate. David boiled water for tea, and they silently drank as Abtomat stood by the window.
I don't see a cord or anything for it to plug into to get power, David said. Danica looked over at the robot and took a sip. It uses radiation to function. That's great. No need for it to recharge, Errol said. Hey man, I need to go outside. Can you come with me? David asked, turning to Errol. David held the torch as Errol slowly descended, breathing heavy on each step. Listen, I know it's scary as hell out here, but can you take a piss by yourself? It's Abtomat. What about it? We don't have a dosimeter. Yeah, I know. That's a problem.
but we're not planning on sticking around. We'll get the F out of here and do our best. I can't carry Danica and the packs, and you can't carry anything, David said as he walked over once done. Abtomat is taking her. Thought we already settled this? Errol asked as he finished. David turned around, face barely visible. What's up with you? You sick again? Your face is white enough for me to see from here, Errol said. The robot's using radioactive fuel. Errol walked to the front of the building, found a chair, and sat down. I knew this was a flippin' mistake. I should have taken holiday in France. What the hell do we do now? Haven't got a clue, David said as he walked over. I don't know what to say to her. Danica knows. Let her decide. We leave at first light. We'll use Abtomat to get us to the rendezvous. How's the charge on the phone and battery back? Danica asked as they entered the flat. David collected the trash and pulled the battery pack out. The battery is at 89% and my phone is 75. We'll have to conserve power, Danica said. Errol climbed into his sleeping bag and David turned off the lamp and got into his. They could hear others outside. Their voices floated up into the still air. Dim light entered the flat as they awoke. David unpacked everything and consolidated what would fit into 2 road sacks. He'd wear one and Abtomat the other. They set out as the sun continued to rise. Abtomat had no trouble carrying Danica and was keeping up at a good pace. They calculated that it'd take them a day to get out of the zone. They stopped a few times and then several hours later arrived at the power lines. They decided to camp for the night as the sky grew dark. Abtomat placed Danica onto the ground and sat down next to her. David helped Errol unpack some water, the food packs, and stove. It's starting to get cold here at night, Danica said as they both nodded. Errol grabbed his sleeping bag and wrapped it around himself, and Danica did the same. They finished the food packs, David collected the trash, and turned off the stove. What made you start doing this? David asked, turning to Danica. My dad and uncles were liquidators. They tell stories about what it was like after the accident. When I was old enough, I read up on what happened. After graduating school, I needed to find work. My brother moved away along with many of our cousins. Of the few who stayed, we began giving tours, Danica said. Why don't you go legit? Errol asked. I was, at the beginning. I grew tired of stupid questions and the whole tourist thing, riding around in a van playing tour guide for the rich and ignorant. I now make better money, and each time is different. I've met so many cool people along the way, Danica said. I bet you never had trouble like this, Errol said. Last year, I took a group of 5 out, and all it did was rain. One got so sick, we almost had to get help. Spent an extra day in Pripyat, and fortunately, she became well enough to make the trip back out. One of the others had an electric bike and let her use it. If it wasn't for him, it would have taken another day to get out. We were running out of water. So one night, some of us hiked over to the visitor center and filled up our bottles in the bathroom. They have since locked it, so that trick is now gone. They each again took turns relieving themselves, and Danica asked Abtomat to help her. Once they were all back, they settled in for the night. Their faces just poked out of the sleeping bags. Coyotes could be heard in the distance. David passed out the power bars at first light and heated water for tea. Once he packed up, they set out. Abtomat picked up Danica and they headed on. A few meters later, they stopped. What's going on? Errol asked as he walked up to them. I don't know. He just stopped. I asked him to continue, Danica said. Abtomat put Danica down and walked back beneath the power lines and just stood. What do we do now? Errol asked. David and Errol helped Danica to where the robot was standing. They placed her down on the ground. She spoke to it, but it didn't respond. They all took some water and were looking at Abtomat. Danica continued to speak to it. No matter what I say, it does nothing, she said. What it took to get you over here? No way we can get you out, Errol said while clutching his chest. David grabbed his pack, pulled out his phone, and unfolded a keyboard. He then draped his sleeping bag over his head. The glare from the sun was making it difficult to see the screen. Abtomat must have been programmed to operate within a set location. Can't go beyond a certain radius. How do you know that? Danica asked. Not sure, just guessing, David said. What are you doing? Danica asked. Trying to remote into it and see what I can find out, David said. Are you a hacker? Errol asked. Well, kinda. A programmer. Abtomat has security protocols and I'm trying to gain access and see if he has a GUI, David said. Any luck? Danica asked. Not yet. I'm trying a dictionary attack on the robot. It solved almost all of the passphrases. Not sure how long it'll take, David said. The sun was directly overhead. Errol broke out the meal packs and pulled out the stove. No tea. We're out of fuel, he said. They passed food to David as he continued to type. Hours later, the sun began to set. Are you able to walk? Errol asked, turning to Danica. She shook her head as darkness fell upon them. This is what I got so far, David said, showing his screen to the others. I have no idea what I'm looking at, Danica said. Back in Chernobyl, Abtomat found me by latching onto my phone via Bluetooth. He has a limited radius and can't travel beyond it. I have access to his logs, David said. Can you change it? Danica asked. I'm working on it. I just connected via SSH. It's got a dashboard, but I'm still locked out of the higher functions. How far away are we from the edge of the zone? Errol asked. I'd say give or take 7 hours. I've only hiked in and out a few times. So much better on bike, Danica said. I can't wait to shower and eat real food, Errol said as Danica nodded. I hate to say it, looks like we're here for another night, David said. We should save the last of the food packs. We have enough topper bars to have 2 more each. Since Abtomat found us water, we're okay for now, but still don't have that much, Danica said while rubbing her ankle. That's okay. Can't make tea anyway, David said, looking up with a grin. The others chuckled weakly. So, where are you at with this? Errol asked as he got up to stretch. Each command is written in multiple places. The robot will check each to confirm they match. If one's not identical, it'll follow ones that have multiple entries. This was done in case parts of the hardware became damaged, David said. So what does that mean? Errol asked. I have to change data in multiple places, and it looks like the built-in GPS has its own subsystem. Thankfully, it's straightforward, David said. How much time will it take for you to fix it? Errol asked, voice cracking. I may not get to all of it, David said. We've got to get going before we run out of water, Danica said. The others watched as David worked. He pulled the battery pack from his knapsack and plugged in his phone. They heard the tone from it as it began to charge. They each ate a power bar and took sips of water. Abtomat sat motionless, as it has been doing for the last 12 hours. Aren't you afraid of that thing? Errol asked, pointing at the robot. Why? Danica asked. Isn't it toxic? Yeah, but my clothes insulate me from a lot of it, same as you and David's. What I gave you is specially made. That's why it costs a bit more to travel with me than others, Danica said. David continued working well into the night. The others climbed into their sleeping bags. As he fell asleep, a pen and pad fell from his hand and onto the ground. Someone was shaking him as he labored to open his eyes. Hey, wake up, Danica said. What's going on? David asked, rubbing his eyes as the sun began to rise. He's gone. Who? Errol, Danica said. Maybe he went to relieve himself, David said while getting up and stretching. Abtomat was still sitting in the same position as it was last night. Danica crawled over to her pack, pulled out a piece of paper, and crawled back. No way can we all survive on what we have left. You and David won't make it out. Since I have a promising life, I grabbed what I could and will head to the edge of the exclusion zone. For the time you have left, tell David he can have you all to himself. Seems like you made the wrong decision, Danica said while reading from the paper. What the hell happened between the two of you? David asked with his arms up over his head. When you went to Chernobyl, he told me he had feelings for me. I told him I don't get involved with anyone I meet while doing this. He seemed okay with it. Obviously, he wasn't okay. The bloody wanker took our supplies. This is some real shite we're in. Do you think you can get Abtomat going? Danica asked as tears ran down her face. David sat down and hugged her. He let go once Danica took a deep breath. She put her hand onto his cheek and said something. I mean, thank you. Better get back to it. Don't have much power left and I have a lot of work to do, David said. A cool breeze blew across the field as the sun was sitting high. Danica found a power bar at the bottom of her rucksack and offered it. No, you eat it. I can stand to lose a few kilos anyway. She broke it in half and stowed the remainder. David typed well into the night after he wrapped Danica in her sleeping bag. He could hear coyotes again as their cries echoed in the distance. Please pick up Danica, David said, and she felt the ground fall away. They headed past the point at which just a few days ago, Abtomat wouldn't pass. He carried Danica with David trailing behind. He labored to keep up and Abtomat slowed his pace. 5 hours later, they stopped for a break and David gave Danica the other half of the power bar. She could barely protest as she chewed it. Danica began to cough as the water entered her throat. She heard Ruben's voice and then David's. She opened her eyes and saw she was inside the minivan. Ruben pulled the water bottle away from her. Holy shite, kid, I thought we lost you. Thank God Big Boy here got a message out before his phone died. The other one was picked up by security a few hours ago. He got turned around a bit and ended up at a checkpoint. Ruben said, Oh no, he'll rat us out. Danica whispered, Oh, don't worry about that. We need to get you looked at. You's in bad shape, Ruben said. Where's David? Danica asked. He's a few yards away, standing next to... Well, that's the other thing I wanted to talk to you about. Seems like you found an artifact this time in the zone. That some bitch is a doozy, a radioactive automaton, Ruben said. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Please comment below. We look forward to hearing from you. If you enjoyed this program, hit the like button and subscribe so you're informed as to when new stories are available.